Morning my sister called, I was elbow deep in engine grease at the garage where I'd worked since getting out. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing that hit me wrong. Maggie never stopped crying when something was bad. She went completely silent instead, and I learned that difference the hard way the day our mother had her stroke 3 years ago. They took Renee, she said. I wiped my hands on a shop rag. What do you mean took? She went to the laundromat on Decatur, the one near her apartment. She never came back. Kevin's been calling hospitals for 2 hours. Renee is my younger brother Kevin's wife. She was 7 months pregnant with their first, a girl. They'd already picked the name Abigail, and Kevin had painted the nursery himself, this soft yellow-green color Renee called Morning Light. He'd sent me a photo of it with a thumbs-up emoji, and I'd given him hell about being sentimental. I wished more than anything I could take that back. I told Maggie I'd make some calls. I found out what happened 40 minutes later from a detective named Pruitt, who sounded tired in the way cops sound when they've already decided how a case is going to go. Renee had been in the parking lot loading her laundry into her car. 2 men approached her. There was a confrontation. She was beaten. He used the word severely and then paused like he was reading from a form and left on the asphalt. A woman walking her dog found her 20 minutes later. She was unconscious. The baby's heartbeat was faint but present when the ambulance arrived. I drove to St. Dominic's Hospital with my hands tight on the wheel the whole way. Kevin was in the waiting room outside the ICU. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he didn't look up when I came in. I sat down next to him. I put my hand on his back. I didn't say anything because there was nothing useful to say. The doctor came out an hour later. Renee had a fractured eye socket, 3 broken ribs, a ruptured spleen, and bleeding they were still trying to control. She was in surgery. The baby, Abigail, had not survived. The blunt trauma had been too much. Kevin made a sound I will never describe to anyone. I stepped into the hallway. I walked to the end of it. I stood at the window looking out at the parking lot, and I let myself feel it for exactly 2 minutes. The grief and the rage and the helplessness. Because I knew if I let it go longer than that, I would lose the ability to think clearly. And thinking clearly was the only thing I could do for my brother right now. Then I went back inside and I started working the problem. Detective Pruitt told us they had a lead within 48 hours. Security footage from a pharmacy across the street had caught a partial plate. The vehicle came back registered to a man named Boyd Carrick, 34 years old, multiple priors, assault, trafficking of stolen goods, 1 gun charge that got reduced. He ran with a group that called themselves the Copperhead Brotherhood, a loosely organized crew that had been operating out of Gulfport and the surrounding counties for about 6 years. They ran stolen auto parts, some loan sharking, and according to Pruitt, other things we're still building a case on. I asked why Boyd Carrick wasn't already in a cell. Pruitt got quiet for a moment. He said they were working on establishing probable cause for an arrest warrant. He said these things took time. He said he understood how frustrating that was. I thanked him and hung up. I know how to read what a cop isn't saying. I spent 4 years as an MP in the Army before my contract ended. I did 2 deployments, one to Kuwait, one to a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, where I spent 14 months doing criminal investigations alongside CID. I've sat across from people who were lying to me, people who were scared, people who were protecting someone else. Pruitt wasn't lying exactly, but he was scared, and that meant someone was applying pressure from a direction I couldn't see yet. I started doing my own research. It took 3 days of calling in favors and being patient. What I found was this. The Copperhead Brotherhood had a relationship with a county commissioner named Aldridge, who controlled the budget for the sheriff's department. Aldridge wasn't dirty in an obvious way. He just made things slow. Cases involving Copperhead associates had a habit of stalling in ways that were individually explainable and collectively impossible to ignore. A witness recanted. Evidence got misfiled. A detective got reassigned. That kind of slow. Cart's associates, the second man on the footage, was identified as a man named Shep. I don't know his last name. Pruitt wouldn't give it to me. My sources dried up before I got there. But I knew Shep existed, and I knew both men were still walking free, while my brother's wife was in a hospital room with a tube in her chest and a room at home painted morning light green that was never going to be used. Kevin called me on a Thursday night. He'd gotten a message through a mutual contact. He wouldn't tell me how. The message was simple. Back off the questions, or the next thing that happened wouldn't be to someone in a hospital. It would be permanent. I sat in my truck in my driveway for a long time after that call. Then I called my father. My father and I had not spoken in 4 years. That requires some explanation. His name is Douglas. He grew up in Beaumont, Texas, enlisted in the Marines at 18, made it to Sergeant Major before he retired. He was not an easy man to grow up around. not cruel. I want to be precise about that, but the kind of man who believed that softness was a thing you had to purge from a person, that love had to have edges to it to be real. He pushed Kevin and me in ways that left marks on different parts of us. Kevin turned inward. I became someone who was very good at his job and very bad at everything else. The falling out between us was over something that sounds small when I summarize it. He missed Kevin's wedding because of a fishing trip he'd already planned, and he thought that was a reasonable decision. It wasn't small to Kevin. It wasn't small to me. I told him things I meant, but probably could have said differently, and he told me things he meant that I'm still unpacking, and then we both went silent the way men in our family go silent. But Douglas wasn't just a retired Marine Sergeant Major. He'd spent the 12 years since retirement building a private security and logistics firm called Ironfield Group. They had contracts with 3 different federal agencies, private security work overseas, and a client list that included people I'd read about in newspapers. He had resources. He had relationships. He had, most importantly, men, former military, former law enforcement, people who were very good at finding information and applying pressure through legal channels, and some channels that were adjacent to legal, in ways that took a good attorney to appreciate. I hadn't called him in 4 years. I called him now. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what happened to Renee. I told him about Abigail. I told him about the threats. I told him about Commissioner Aldrich and the pattern of stalled cases. I told him all of it in about 8 minutes, straight through, no editorializing. When I finished, there was a pause. "I'll be there Saturday," he said. "Have everything you've got ready." That was it. No apology for the wedding, no acknowledgement of the 4 years. Just a man who had been given a problem that needed solving and was now solving it. I sat in my truck until midnight. I don't know what I was feeling exactly. Relief, partly, but also something more complicated. The way it felt to need someone you'd cut off, and to have them answer anyway. Douglas arrived Saturday with 2 men I didn't know and one I did. A former CID warrant officer named Mace, who I'd worked alongside briefly in Afghanistan. Mace was methodical, quiet, and had a memory like a legal database. He never forgot a face, a name, or jurisdictional boundary, and he was meticulous about staying inside them. We sat around the table in Kevin's kitchen while Kevin was at the hospital. Douglas spread out what his people had already gathered in the 48 hours since I'd called him. It was more than I'd gotten in a week. Boyd Carrick had 2 properties, a house in his name in Pascagoula, and a warehouse space registered to a Shell LLC in Gulfport. The Copperhead Brotherhood used the warehouse for storage. There were 3 other senior members they'd identified besides Carrick and Shep, and all of them had connections through Aldrich to 2 separate city council members in addition to the county commissioner. Douglas looked at me across the table. "This isn't a gang that got lucky," he said. "This is an operation with political cover. We're not going to knock it down with a conversation. So how do we knock it down? Carefully," he said, "and through every legitimate channel available, in a sequence that doesn't give them time to react." What Douglas's team did over the next 2 weeks, I can only partially describe, because some of it was under NDA and some of it is still the subject of ongoing legal proceedings. What I can tell you is this. They hired a forensic accountant who traced money movement between Carrick's LLC and Aldrich's campaign finance accounts. Not a direct wire. It was layered through 3 intermediaries, but it was there. They documented it and handed the entire package to a federal prosecutor named Winters, who had been building a separate RICO case against the Brotherhood for 18 months and had been blocked at the state level 3 separate times. May spent 5 days cultivating a witness, one of Carrick's lower-level associates, who had his own reasons to want out and was receptive when someone gave him a structured path. That witness gave a statement. The statement corroborated the financial trail and added specific details about the night Renee was attacked, including the fact that it wasn't random. Someone had told Carrick that Kevin had been asking questions about a stolen vehicle ring that the Brotherhood ran through a salvage yard Kevin's friend worked at. Kevin didn't even know he'd stumbled near something dangerous. He'd just been making conversation. The arrest warrant for Boyd Carrick came through on a Tuesday morning. Sheriff's deputies from a neighboring county served it. Not Gulfport Douglas, had made a quiet call to ensure that. Carrick was taken into custody at his Pascagoula house at 6:15 in the morning. Shep, whose full name turned out to be Sherman Beaupre, was picked up in Biloxi 3 hours later. Commissioner Aldridge resigned from his position by 5 o'clock that afternoon, citing personal health reasons. He was indicted 6 weeks later. I was with Kevin at the hospital when his phone buzzed with the news about the arrests. He read the notification and then put his phone down very carefully on the tray table beside Renee's bed. Renee was awake by then. She'd been out of the ICU for 4 days. She was still in a lot of pain. She had more surgery ahead of her. But she was awake and she could talk. And the day before, she'd squeezed Kevin's hand and made a joke about the hospital food that was so perfectly stubbornly like her that Kevin had laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. He looked at the notification again. Then he looked at me. "Is it over?" he asked. "Carrick and Shepard in custody," I said. "Federal case. The DA is pursuing the assault charges separately. They're going to argue for feticide enhancement. The DA's office confirmed that this morning." Kevin nodded slowly. He looked at Renee, who had fallen back asleep. "Good," he said quietly. "Good." I stepped out to the hallway to give him a minute. My father was waiting there. He'd come to the hospital without me asking. He was standing with a coffee cup in both hands looking at the floor. And when he heard me, he looked up. "She's doing better," I said. "Good," he nodded. "Kevin holding up? He will." We were quiet for a moment. Down the hall a card rattled past. A nurse walked by without looking at us. "Dad," I said. He looked at me. "Why did you answer when I called?" He was quiet for longer than I expected. He looked at the cup in his hands. He was 63 years old, and I'd spent most of my life either trying to earn something from him or resenting him for not giving it freely. And standing there in that hospital hallway, I realized I was genuinely asking, not accusing. "Because you called," he said finally. "You wouldn't have called if you had any other option. That means it was real." "It was real before I called." "I know." He said it without defensiveness, just acknowledgement. "I know it was." That was as close as Douglas would ever come to an apology. And standing there, I decided it was enough. Not because I didn't want more, because I understood that this was what he had, and he was giving it. Boyd Carrick was convicted on federal racketeering charges 14 months later. He received 22 years without the possibility of parole. The feticide charge added an additional 12 years consecutive. The DA's office had argued, successfully, that Abigail's death was not incidental, but a direct and foreseeable result of the attack on Renee. Sherman Beaupre took a plea deal and received 16 years. He testified against Carrick and 3 other Brotherhood members. Renee's recovery took 8 months. The last surgery was in the spring. By summer, she was walking without pain for the first time, and in August, she and Kevin came to a cookout at my place. And she stood in my backyard with a bottle of sparkling water and laughed at something my neighbor said, and looked, for a moment, like a person who might someday be fully okay again. Kevin told me later that they were talking about trying again. That they weren't ready yet, but they were talking. He said Renee was the one who brought it up, which didn't surprise me. Renee had always been the bravest person in that marriage. The nursery is still painted morning light green. Kevin said he couldn't make himself repaint it. He said it felt like the right color for whatever comes next. My father and I have dinner once a month now. The first few were stiff and careful, and we talked mostly about logistics. The case, Kevin's situation, Ironfield's work. Gradually, the conversation widened. He asked me once what I'd done after I got out of the army, and I told him about the garage, the grease-covered mornings, the slow adjustment to civilian time. He listened. He didn't tell me I should have done something bigger with my training. He just listened. I don't know what we're building. I don't have a word for what we are to each other right now. Not estranged anymore, but not fully repaired. Something in between. Something that requires showing up and eating and talking about things that don't cost much until eventually, maybe, you work your way back to the things that do. He paid for dinner last month without saying anything about it. I let him. I think about Abigail sometimes. I think about the yellow green room and the name they'd chosen, and the fact that she never got to be a person in the world, only a person in their plans. There should have been more charges. There should always be more charges when something like that happens, and there aren't when the law doesn't have a category large enough for what was actually lost. I'm glad the feticide enhancement went through. I'm glad the DA fought for it. It doesn't fill the room that's still painted for her. Nothing does. But it's the difference between the law seeing her and the law looking past her. And that difference matters to Kevin, and so it matters to me. I still work at the garage. I'm good with engines. There's something I've always liked about a system where the problem has a source and the source has a fix, where if you're methodical and patient and you don't skip steps, you can make something broken run again. Some things don't work that way. I know that. I've known it since that waiting room, since Kevin's face in his hands, since the sound he made when the doctor came out. But some things do, and you hold on to that. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the practical, mechanical kind of thinking I picked up working with engines and doing criminal investigations. Every outcome has a chain behind it. Every result traces back to a decision someone made, sometimes years earlier, sometimes the moment before. Boyd Carrick made choices. He ran with people who believed that fear was a substitute for respect, that owning a commissioner was the same thing as being untouchable. He was wrong about that, and the wrongness of it cost him 22 years. That's not luck, and it's not fate. That's the math of how systems actually work when someone patient enough to find every link in the chain gets involved. But I think about my own choices too. I think about the 4 years I didn't call my father. I was right about the wedding. I want to be honest about that. What he did to Kevin was a real thing, a real absence, and I don't walk it back. But I made silence into a permanent condition when it should have been a temporary one. I let a breach become a wall. And the only reason I picked up the phone was because Renee was in surgery and my brother had just made a sound I will never describe to anyone, and I had run completely out of other options. I don't think you should have to run out of options before you ask for help from the people who are built to give it. That's the thing I'm still learning. Strength is not the same as self-sufficiency. I spent 4 years in the army learning to operate as part of a unit, and then I spent the years after that acting like a lone mechanic. Like every problem was mine to diagnose alone. It took a crisis to remind me that I already knew better. Renee is the bravest person I know. Not because she survived, though she did, and it was hard, and it took 8 months and more surgery than anyone should have to go through. But because she was the one who brought up trying again. She was the one who decided the morning light green room still meant something. That takes a different kind of strength than anything the army ever trained me for. The kind that has to be rebuilt slowly, from the inside, without a manual. Kevin is going to be okay. I believe that the way I believe in things I've watched work, not on faith, but on evidence. I've watched him show up every day, even when showing up cost him something. That's what integrity actually looks like. Not the word on a motivational poster, the daily, unglamorous version of it. And Douglas, my father, is teaching me something I didn't expect to learn from him at this point in my life. He's teaching me that it's possible to change the way you show up without making a speech about it. He paid for dinner last month and didn't say a word. He asked about my work and actually listened. That's not nothing. For a man like him, that might be everything. I don't know what Abigail would have been like. I think about that more than I say out loud. But I know the room is still painted for her, and I know Kevin can't bring himself to change it, and I know that's not weakness. That's a man holding space for something real that deserved to exist in the world. The law saw her eventually. That matters. It doesn't fix everything. But it matters. What I know is this. The people who thought they were untouchable were wrong. The systems they corrupted were slower than they should have been, but they weren't broken beyond repair. And the family I almost let go of permanently turned out to be the thing that held when everything else was coming apart. You can waste a lot of time building walls you call principles. I know. I built a good one. It took Renee's life nearly ending to make me see it for what it was. I'm not going to waste the lesson.